The city lights glittered far below, a sea of gold and silver stretching toward the horizon. But Emily Lawson didn't bother looking at them anymore. From her wheelchair, parked near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse she once called home, the view felt like a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. The glass was cold under her fingertips as she reached up, feeling the faint vibration of wind against the building. Beyond it lay the world she used to own, a world where she could walk into any room and command it, where her father's influence meant her life was a seamless string of privileges. Now, that world felt like another lifetime. The car accident had stolen her mobility in a matter of seconds. One moment she was laughing in the passenger seat, wind in her hair. The next, she was waking up in a sterile hospital room, her legs numb, her body foreign. Doctors explained the spinal damage in clinical tones, their faces masks of professionalism. But all she could hear was the roar of panic in her head. She had tried to call her father immediately, desperate for the comfort of his voice. But the conversation was brief, his words clipped. At the time, she had told herself it was the shock, that he needed time. That illusion shattered a month later, when she told him she was pregnant. She remembered that afternoon as vividly as if it had happened minutes ago. Henry Lawson, tall, silver-haired, and intimidating in his perfectly tailored suit, stood at the head of the long dining table. In the penthouse, the place smelled faintly of cedar and expensive whiskey, and the winter sun streamed in through the windows, cutting sharp lines across the floor. Emily had rehearsed her words 100 times, but when she saw the tightness in his jaw, they all fell apart. "I'm going to have a baby," she managed, her voice trembling but resolute. At first, he simply stared at her, then his brow furrowed, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. "With him?" he asked, his tone laced with disbelief. He didn't even say the man's name. David, the quiet, hard-working artist her father had dismissed as a man with no prospects. She nodded, knowing it was pointless to lie. The explosion came quickly. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You've destroyed everything I've built for you. You were supposed to take your place in this family, in this company, and now you've—" He broke off, shaking his head as though the words were too foul to speak aloud. "It's my life," she said quietly, gripping the arms of her wheelchair until her knuckles turned white. "And my baby, not under my roof," he snapped, his blue eyes, so like her own, were cold and unyielding. "You've embarrassed the family. You've embarrassed me. If you want to throw your future away for a mistake, then you can do it without my name and without my money." The next moments blurred together in a haze of humiliation and disbelief. He called for the driver. 2 uniformed staff members quietly packed some of her clothes into a suitcase. By the time the elevator doors closed, her father was already pouring himself another drink, his back to her. The days that followed were a blur of pain, exhaustion, and numbness. She ended up in a small, drafty apartment on the far side of the city, paid for with the last of the settlement money from the accident. The building smelled faintly of mold and fried food from the diner next door. The elevator worked only half the time, forcing her to rely on neighbors to help her up the narrow stairs. The heating was unreliable, and the thin curtains did nothing to block the cold seeping through the windows at night. Her savings dwindled faster than she expected. Rent alone took a huge bite, and the rest went to groceries, medical bills, and the prenatal vitamins her doctor insisted she needed. She learned quickly that the world outside her father's wealth was far less forgiving. Public transportation was a nightmare in a wheelchair. Job applications were ignored once employers saw the chair or her swelling belly. The baby's father, overwhelmed and unprepared, had disappeared weeks after the accident, leaving nothing behind but an apologetic text message and a promise to figure things out. That never materialized. Still, she clung to small routines to keep herself from collapsing under the weight of it all. Every morning she wheeled herself to the tiny kitchen, made tea, and sat by the cracked window, watching the neighborhood come alive. Delivery trucks rattled down the street. Children in puffy jackets ran to catch the bus, and the old man across the road swept the same patch of sidewalk, muttering under his breath. She told herself she was part of this world now, even if she didn't quite believe it yet. Loneliness was the worst of it. At night, when the city settled into a muted hum, she would lie in bed, her hands resting over her belly, feeling the faint, fluttering kicks that reminded her she wasn't truly alone. She would talk to the baby in whispers, telling stories about the mother she hoped to be and the life she hoped to give. Some nights she cried so hard she worried the baby could feel it, so she forced herself to stop, wiping her face with trembling hands and whispering, "It's going to be okay, somehow. It's going to be okay, asterisk," but she didn't know if she believed that anymore. Asterisk. The winter was only growing harsher, the wind slicing through her thin coat whenever she ventured outside. She had no friends nearby, no family willing to take her in, and no safety net to fall back on. And though she wouldn't admit it to herself, there were moments, dark, fleeting moments, when she wondered how much longer she could keep going. Asterisk. It was on one of those mornings, her rent overdue and her cupboards nearly empty, that she decided to wheel herself down to the community center a few blocks away. She had heard they sometimes helped people in emergencies, food assistance. Maybe a voucher for heating. It wasn't pride that held her back until now. It was fear of being seen this way, of being recognized as Henry Lawson's fallen daughter. But fear wasn't going to feed her baby. Asterisk. She pulled on her worn coat, tightened the scarf around her neck, and wheeled herself into the biting wind. Snowflakes drifted from the gray sky, clinging to her hair. Her fingers ached from the cold. As she gripped the wheels, she didn't know it yet, but this trip would change everything, not because of the assistance she might get, but because of the man she was about to meet. Asterisk. The single dad janitor who would see her not as a burden, not as a failure, but as someone worth saving. The rain was relentless that morning, a steady gray curtain that blurred the city into a smudged watercolor. By the time Emily reached the community center, the wheels of her chair were slick and her hair clung damply to her cheeks. The glass doors loomed ahead, fogged over from the warmth inside, and she had to strain to push them open. The blast of heated air was a small mercy, but it couldn't thaw the heaviness in her chest. Asterisk. The lobby was nearly empty except for a few people filling out forms at a folding table, and a man in a faded blue uniform pushing a mop across the tiled floor. He looked up when she entered. His face was weathered, the kind that suggested years of hard work, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that caught her off guard. Asterisk. "You're freezing," he said, leaning the mop against the wall. His voice was warm, unhurried. Without waiting for her to answer, he disappeared through a nearby door. Emily sat there awkwardly, unsure if she should roll toward the reception desk or wait. A moment later, he returned carrying a towel and a steaming styrofoam cup. Asterisk. "Here," he said, kneeling slightly so they were at eye level. "It's just coffee from the staff room, but it's hot, and the towel's clean." Asterisk. She hesitated, the part of her that had grown wary of pity wanting to refuse, but her hands were trembling from the cold, and the smell of the coffee was too inviting. She took it with a quiet, "Thank you." Asterisk. He smiled, as if that was all the payment he needed, and went back to his mop. Though his eyes lingered on her from time to time, the receptionist was busy on the phone, so Emily just sat there, sipping slowly. The warmth spread through her fingers, then up her arms, loosening something inside her she hadn't realized was clenched. Asterisk. When he returned to the area near the entrance, he paused again. "Haven't seen you around before," he said casually. "I'm Jack. Been keeping this place clean for 5 years now." Asterisk. She nodded. "Emily." Asterisk. "You here for a program? Food pantries on Thursdays, job help on Mondays. Today's just a rainy Tuesday." His grin was faint, but disarming. Asterisk. She found herself answering in more detail than she intended. "I heard someone here might help with groceries, or heating." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, and she looked away, embarrassed. Asterisk. Jack didn't press. He didn't ask the questions others had asked. Where was her family? What happened? Why she was in a wheelchair? Instead, he simply nodded toward a bench against the wall. "Sit tight. I'll see what I can do." Asterisk. She watched him walk toward a door marked staff only, his steps brisk, but not hurried. He returned with a brown paper bag. "It's not much," he said, "but there's a sandwich, an apple, and a granola bar in here. Might get you through the afternoon. There's also a number for a local church. Good people. They run deliveries for folks who can't get out much." Asterisk. Emily blinked at the bag, surprised not by the contents, but by the care with which it was offered. Her throat tightened. "You didn't have to." Asterisk. "I know," he interrupted gently, "but you look like you could use a hand." Asterisk. For a moment, the noise of the rain against the glass seemed louder, filling the silence between them. Emily gripped the bag, feeling the crinkle of the paper under her fingers. She was used to being invisible lately, to people avoiding her eyes, to being an inconvenience in narrow doorways and crowded sidewalks, but Jack was looking right at her, not with pity, but with something closer to understanding. Asterisk. She found herself telling him more than she'd planned. Not the whole truth. Not her last name or the penthouse or the father who had turned his back on her, but she spoke about the accident, about being on her own, about the baby she was carrying. His face didn't change. He didn't flinch or judge. He just leaned against the mop handle and listened. Like her story was worth the time it took to tell, when she trailed off. Unsure why she'd said so much, he simply said, "You're stronger than you think." It was such a simple sentence, but it hit her harder than she expected. No one had said anything like that since the accident. Her father had called her reckless. Her doctor had called her a challenging case, and the few acquaintances who still spoke to her did so with thinly veiled discomfort. But this man, this janitor she just met, was looking at her like she wasn't broken at all. She left the community center that day with the paper bag in her lap and his words echoing in her head. Outside, the rain had eased into a mist, and the cold felt a little less biting. She didn't know if she'd see him again. She wasn't even sure she should. But something about him, his steady presence, his lack of questions, had slipped under her defenses. Over the next few days, her thoughts kept circling back to him. She wondered about his life, about the lines around his eyes that hinted at laughter as much as hardship. She wondered what kind of man noticed a stranger enough to fetch them coffee and a clean towel without being asked. A week later, she found out. She had returned to the community center for the Thursday pantry, hoping to get a small bag of groceries. Jack was there, stacking boxes of canned goods for the volunteers. When he saw her, his face lit up in quiet recognition. Emily, he said, as though they were old friends. "How's the little one?" She hesitated, her hand resting instinctively on her belly. "Still kicking, literally." He chuckled. "That's good, means they're strong." This time, she learned a little about him. Jack was a single father, raising his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, on his own after his wife passed away 3 years earlier. He worked nights at the community center and picked up odd jobs during the day to make ends meet. His apartment was small, but warm. His pride was in his daughter, how she was top of her class, how she loved to paint, how she had a stubborn streak that reminded him of her mother. The more they spoke, the more Emily noticed how easily he laughed, how he listened without drifting into advice or criticism. When the elevator at her building broke down the following week, it was Jack who offered to carry her and the chair up the stairs. When she tried to refuse, embarrassed, he just said, "You're not heavy, don't make me let you freeze out." Here, it was strange, feeling the edges of her loneliness soften. She had built walls after her father's rejection, walls made of silence, pride, and a fear of depending on anyone. But Jack's quiet persistence was like water wearing down stone. He didn't push, but he kept showing up in small ways, a bag of groceries here, a repaired chair wheel there, and offered to call when the snow made the sidewalks too treacherous. And every time she tried to thank him, he just shrugged and said, "We look out for each other around here." Emily didn't realize it yet, but the man she had met by chance, in a damp lobby with a mop in his hand, was about to change the course of her life. And for the first time in months, she felt the faint stirrings of hope that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to face the future alone. The morning sun filtered weakly through the tall, grimy windows of the maintenance lounge, casting a pale glow over the chipped coffee table where Emily sat, her wheelchair angled toward the door. Her heart pounded as she waited. For what? Exactly. She wasn't sure. A conversation, a miracle, maybe both. Moments later, the door swung open, and Jack stepped inside, his little girl Mia trailing shyly behind him, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. The scent of coffee and industrial cleaning supplies clung to him, but his presence carried warmth, something she hadn't felt in months. Jack's eyes found hers instantly. "You're early," he said softly, setting down a toolbox and walking over. Emily's lips curved into a faint smile. "Couldn't sleep." She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the armrests. "I keep thinking maybe this is a mistake. You don't even know me." Jack crouched in front of her, his voice low but steady. "I know enough. I know you've been through hell, that you're stronger than you think, and that you're about to bring a little life into the world. That's not a mistake. That's something worth standing beside." His hand hovered for a moment, then gently rested over hers, not pushing, just reassuring. Emily felt her throat tighten. She had been touched by plenty of hands in the past, doctors, nurses, even her father's, but there was something unshakably sincere in Jack's gesture. Mia stepped closer, peeking at Emily's belly with wide, curious eyes. "Is there a baby in there?" she asked. Emily chuckled, wiping at the corner of her eye. Yes, there is. A little boy. Asterisk Mia's face lit up. Can I help take care of him? The innocent offer made something inside Emily break open. Like sunlight through storm clouds. I'd like that, she whispered. Asterisk Jack glanced between them, sensing how fragile this moment was. Listen, he began. I've been where you are. Different story. Same pain. When Mia's mom left, everyone thought I'd fail. Some even bet on it. But here we are. It wasn't easy. Some days were impossible. But we made it. And you will too. You just need people in your corner. Asterisk Emily shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping. My father used to say the same thing. But he meant people who could advance his company, not someone who'd just be there. Asterisk Jack's jaw tightened at the mention of Henry Lawson, the man who had thrown his own daughter aside like bad stock. Then maybe he never understood what real loyalty is, he said. I'm not here for contracts or deals. I'm here because you need help, and because Mia needs to see that helping people is just what you do. Asterisk her eyes searched his face, looking for any trace of pity, but finding none. There was only an unshakable steadiness, the kind you see in someone who's fought battles no one else noticed. For the first time in months, she let herself believe that maybe she wasn't completely alone. Asterisk the weeks that followed became a rhythm she hadn't expected. Jack adjusted her chair when it jammed, brought her meals when her hands were too tired to hold a tray, and walked her through breathing exercises her physical therapist had suggested. Mia drew pictures for the baby and taped them on Emily's wall, clumsy crayon sketches of a smiling stick figure family that always included Emily in the center. Asterisk one afternoon, as the first snow began to fall outside, Emily's father arrived at the hospital unannounced. The air in the room shifted like the moment before a thunderclap. Henry stood tall, dressed in an immaculate black coat, his expression unreadable. Jack was at Emily's side, holding a blanket over her legs. Asterisk I heard you were still here, Henry said, his voice deep but controlled. And that you've had help. His gaze flicked to Jack, appraising, almost dismissive. Asterisk Emily took a breath. Yes, Jack's been here when you weren't. He didn't have to be. But he was. Asterisk Henry's eyes narrowed. But there was something else, something almost uncertain, behind them. I may have been wrong, he said finally, as if the words cost him. I thought you needed to learn strength on your own. Maybe I forgot what family is supposed to mean. Asterisk Jack stayed silent, letting Emily answer. She looked at her father for a long moment, then at Jack and Mia. Family isn't blood or nameplates on office doors, she said. It's who shows up when everything falls apart. Asterisk Henry looked away, jaw tightening, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded once, turned, and left, the sound of his footsteps fading into the hall. Asterisk Emily exhaled slowly, tears threatening but not falling. Jack leaned closer, his voice a whisper meant only for her. Whatever happens next, you've got us. That's not changing. Asterisk for the first time since her world had shattered. Emily smiled without forcing it. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the city in white, quiet, steady, and full of possibility.